Who's really to blame for the Wild's goaltending problems so far this season? Would Kevin Fiala actually be traded by the Wild? Plus, what makes Nico Sturm one of the underrated members of this Minnesota Wild team? We ask Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn Podcast that and more today on Locked On Wild.
You're Locked On Wild, your daily podcast on the Minnesota Wild, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another episode of Locked On Wild, your daily Minnesota Wild podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Wild your first listen every day. And just as a reminder, Locked On Wild is free and available wherever you listen to podcasts. On today's episode of Locked On Wild, we're joined by Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn Podcast to try to figure out what exactly is going on with the goaltending position for the Minnesota Wild. We'll also talk about some of the recent rumblings surrounding Kevin Fiala and whether or not that is justified or if he has become kind of an easy player for the coaching staff to point to when things go wrong. So we'll chat about all of that here on today's episode. My name is Seth Topal, host of Locked On Wild, veteran Minnesota sports content producer, and happy to have along for today's episode Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn Podcast. Brett, how are things going? Glad to have you back on.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back. Things are going good. Closing out some projects at work on time, so that's always exciting. 3-day week, which is always really good too. So it's basically already Wednesday today. So I mean that's a nice plus. So I'm doing pretty well. Thanks for having me.
It's Thanksgiving week. Hard to believe we're already at that point in the year, and the Wild are coming off of a weekend in which they were competitive against the Florida Panthers and the Tampa Bay Lightning, ultimately picking up just 1 point. And I had a friend ask me, which kind of spawned a poll that I threw out on Twitter yesterday, in terms of what our level of concern is with Cam Talbot and Kaapo Kahkonen. Obviously, it's a smaller sample size so far this year, and so obviously you have any sort of a bad night, that's going to make the numbers look worse than they are. But it has been a situation, at least so far this year, from what I've seen, that we haven't gotten that same crispness that we saw last year between Talbot and Kaapo. So I wanted to get your just assessment of where the goaltending is at so far for the Wild. Are you concerned, or at this point, is it still a little too early to tell as to what's going on between the pipes?
Yeah, I don't know if concern's the word that I want to use. I don't know if worried's any better, alarmed or whatever, but it just seems like, to me, it just feels like basically like one goal a night, you're sitting there kind of going, I feel like you should have had that one. And I mean, obviously there's been some goals where it's like, well, yeah, he's kind of hung out to dry on that one, or yeah, he makes that save 50% of the time. But something we brought up on the last episode of Sound the Foghorn was we really don't feel like either Kaapo or Cam Talbot have stepped in and stolen a game for the Wild yet. I mean, granted, that's because the Wild have outplayed a lot of teams this year, and that helps. But we really don't feel like, we were trying to kind of backtrack and think about, okay, what's like a huge save that either Talbot or Kahkonen made that like we felt like, saved the game, won the game. And the only one we could really come up with was the overtime save in the home opener against Winnipeg. But at that point, already given up 5 goals in the game. So it's like, well, yeah, that was a big save, but we just don't feel like he's stolen any games yet. And Kahkonen, it just seems to, like, for him, and it happened in the preseason too, it just feels like it takes him a period to settle in. And when that happens, he's given up 2-3 goals in the first period, and then you're digging yourself out of a hole, which we saw with Tampa Bay on Sunday night, where he gives up, I think it was 2 or 3 goals in the first period, and the whole game, the Wild were outplaying Tampa Bay. And if he makes, again, one, if he stops one of those pucks from going in the net, that backhand from Maroon, as nice of a shot it was, I mean, from that angle on a backhand, you got to be able to save that one.
Yeah, that's spot on. I mean, it feels like there have been, I think there was one in Kaapo's start against, I believe it was Nashville, where he had one, put his glove up to try to save it, and he just straight up missed it. And
Yeah.
so I think we're getting some of just that bad luck with some of the goals that have been given up. But I think another thing that has really hurt the team in the goaltending department is, the number of penalties the Wild have taken has led to so many power play opportunities for opponents, and you're giving a lot of good teams extra opportunities, and with the fact that the Wild have on the penalty kill sometimes not been able to clear the puck as much as that we would like. I think that is, a part of the problem is that, some of those opportunities just are coming with extra attackers that you maybe wouldn't have in a normal game situation if not for a penalty.
Yeah, I don't know the exact numbers of how many penalties they've taken, but it certainly feels like they take too many every night. And they say your goalie's got to be your best penalty killer. And I think beginning of the year we saw that be a major problem. I think it's gotten much better since then. I think they've within the last 2-3 weeks, I think they have a top 5 penalty kill unit. But so I mean that's improved, which is great. But yeah, I think playing at we talk about right at the hop how good they have been. We haven't seen goalies steal games because they've all played every team, and a lot of that's been at 5-on-5. So when they're not in the box, they're playing usually with the puck in the offensive zone. And when the puck's in the offensive zone, your goalie doesn't have to make any saves. So that's the ideal situation. But we just haven't seen that come. I just feel like they haven't had that complete game where they get great goaltending and where they really outplay a team.
Yeah, it's crazy too, because I think we've seen the talent level for a lot of it. Everybody got so used to playing the same teams last year, playing divisional teams, and that was it. I think by and large, the competition that the Wild have played so far this year has been better. I mean, there have been a couple of teams that they've played that, are not particularly good, but that's, I think, another angle to this is that we're seeing some of those numbers a little higher for the goalies this year because the competition level has just been a lot higher that they've faced so far this year.
Yeah, I think that definitely factors in. I mean, you have, guys like Kaprizov who, coming into this season had seen 7 other teams plus Vancouver, and no one else. And, I think teams are keying on him some more. Kevin Fiala is shooting at a career low percentage right now. You face some good teams. I mean, Florida was one of our picks for a unanimous cup favorite on Sound the Foghorn. Tampa Bay is a 2-time cup defending champion. They got New Jersey coming up, and they've been playing some better hockey as of late. We even saw them see Nashville for the first time in a year and a half, and they get stomped by Nashville. And yeah, I mean, I just think a lot of there's some unfamiliarity there, and you got to kind of learn. And maybe that's why I feel like they've had a lot of slow starts, not just the goaltending, just the team as a whole, where they kind of come out in the first period and kind of look like they're trying to figure things out. They settle in, and then we see the second's pretty even, and they tend to outplay teams in the third. But I think they need to be ready off the hop because I feel like that's where we're losing a lot of the games is kind of right in that first period, and we're battling from behind. And we've been good at battling from behind, but the couple times they've been in the lead, I think they've pulled out and won those games. So I'd like to see more of those types of wins.
Agreed. Is there a point in the year where it's going to be like, okay, if we don't see Talbot and Kaapo have those like steal a game type performances, or just even to where we 4 or 5 games in a row are like, wow, he's really on it. Is there a point in the year where if we haven't hit that then those alarm bells start to kind of go off?
Yeah, I would say right around the turn of the new year. I mean, they've gotten away with it right now because they've gotten a lot of scoring. But if all of a sudden, you have a little bit of a scoring drought, or you get some big injuries that come in, and maybe you lose a Kaprizov or you lose a Fiala, or if someone gets traded or something, and you're having trouble finding your scoring, that's when you need your goaltending to step up. And the one problem it's not is on the defensive end. I believe in expected goals against, the Wild have the second lowest, so the second best expected goals against in the NHL, which means they're giving up, I think it's right around 2 goals a game expected. And they've obviously given up far more than that on average, where we've seen some shootouts this year with 5-4, 6-5. Like that's not it would make Jacques Lemaire roll in his grave if he were dead. Like he's probably just like pulling his hair out. Like, no, we need to play 2-1 games, not 6-5 running gun. But yeah,
it's been an interesting kind of stylistic change, as we're so used to the the grinded out style and now going more towards an offensive style, I'm not gonna complain. But at the end of the day, I would love nothing more than to see like a 3-1 or a 4-2 win. Stack a few of those together so that we can say, hey, I think both goalies have kind of started to figure it out a little bit.
Yeah, I think that's certainly the ideal situation, and it's the schedule really the rest of the month doesn't get a whole lot easier. You get New Jersey, Winnipeg, who you shot out with last time, then you get Tampa Bay at home, and then maybe a get right game to end off the month against Arizona, who I think was one of the few teams where they haven't allowed more than a goal. But I mean, it's hard to allow more than a goal to that team. But they might have even had 2 that night. But yeah.
It bears watching, and so we'll keep an eye on it. Next thing that I wanted to discuss, Brett, is the Kevin Fiala situation, and you gave me a perfect segue in saying not an ideal situation because it's so bizarre, and so we will kind of narrow in on that when we come back. More with Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn podcast coming up here on Locked on Wild. Thanksgiving is finally here, and that means one thing: tons of desserts. We're talking pies, cookies, cake, candy, chocolate, ice cream, you name it, it will be on your table. What if I told you there was a way to get all of that delicious taste and not all of the calories? Enter Built Bar. Built Bar is your best option to avoid some of the calorie buildup that happens around the holidays. For instance, one slice of pie can have upwards of 300 calories on the low end. Most Built Bars, though, contain only 130 calories and only 4 grams of sugar with plenty of protein. Low calorie, low carb, low fat, high protein, covered in 100% real chocolate. So head to Built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll receive 15% off of your next order. Again, use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at Built.com. Continuing our chat with Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn podcast on today's episode of Locked on Wild. Thank you once again for making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Make sure, if you have not already, to check out the Sound the Foghorn podcast as well. You guys do at least one episode a week, correct? It's sometimes depending on what happens. If there's some big news, maybe a second, but for sure one a week, right?
Yeah, most often we're trying to do one a week. Our target is to drop shows Thursday morning. This week it's probably going to be Friday just because of the holiday, but yeah,
Sure.
Usually we try to drop every Thursday morning. Unless there's some big news that we feel like we need to do like a quick 15-20 minute react, but yeah.
Excellent. Kevin Fiala. This whole thing is getting to be just really weird. And we had the article from Michael Russo in which there seems to be a little bit of displeasure towards what Kevin Fiala is doing on the ice. He has been at times pulled off of the power play entirely. And the last few games, he has had large stretches in which he just straight up isn't playing. And that led to one member of the Wild media asking Dean Evason straight up, like, what's going on? And he said, no, Kevin didn't get lost. I forget exactly how the question was phrased, but he said, no, Kevin didn't get lost. We were just playing different players at that point in the game. Is this fair to hone in on all of this for Kevin specifically? Because it seems like he's really the only one getting called out for I don't even know what he's getting called out for.
Yeah, I would say that's more my issue. The whole situation is, they continue to roll out Jordan Greenway, and he missed some games and he's injured, but it's we're going to keep rolling him out. We're going to put him back with Eriksson Ek and Foligno, take Fiala off that line when that line was playing very well together. I may add too, but it just seems like there's always this microscope, particularly from, it seems like Dean Evason, we had him talk about the turnovers and this. It's like, well, what about the other 10 guys that had turnovers tonight? Did you talk to them too? Did you call them out? Obviously he was, probably on a pretty thin rope coming in this season when the team filed for arbitration. But yeah, from a coaching perspective, I get it. It's frustrating. He's a guy you lean on. He's a guy that's supposed to be, probably a 30 goal scorer in an 80 game season. He's shooting, I think coming into last game it was around 3%. Now it's around 5%. He's got it. Whatever. I think it's 4 or 5. I think it's 5 goals on like 57 shots this year, which for him, you'd want that number maybe be closer to 8 or 9, probably more on that 10% range. But it's not like that. The scoring is down from a lack of trying. I mean, he continually is out there every night, seemingly staring into the rafters because he hit one off the post or just missed or bobbled the puck. Like, yeah, it's he's fighting the yips, as some would say, a little bit. But one thing that you learn when you study analytics a little bit in any fashion is that regression exists, and players, teams, goalies, everyone that has hot or cold streaks, more often than not, they'll do what's called regressing back to the mean, which means they'll find kind of that average, that middle ground. I think Kevin Fiala is destined for that in terms of his shooting percentage. I think the goals are going to come for him. I mean, we saw him get one late. I think Gigi Marvin was saying at the time when he was on the ice in the third period, the goalie pulled, he had like 12 minutes of ice time that game. And then he, including an assist in that time, and then he adds, a goal that gets him within one before Ek eventually ties it. Like, it's not a surprise that Kevin Fiala steps up in a big situation, delivers a goal. But yeah, I don't get what Evanson's vendetta against him is. He's not scoring, yeah, but it's not from lack of trying. And it'll really I'm just curious to see how the situation with him plays out this year, because now there's trade rumors swirling and everything else around him. And I love Kevin Fiala, the player. I think wherever he goes, he's gonna be that guy. Like, wow, we traded him. Whoops. Because I just think the numbers are gonna come for him. He's just been snake bitten right now.
Is this something we're even talking about even remotely as much if him and Kaprizov both didn't start the season off not scoring? And I don't want to say, like you alluded to, I don't want to insinuate that Fiala is not playing well. He just simply was getting, great saves against him by goalies, and the puck just was not going in. Is it as big of an issue, if not for the fact, like, let's say Kaprizov starts the year off with a little bit better scoring? Are we talking about this even remotely as much?
Probably still a little bit. I think there was a point where, when Ryan Hartman and Marcus Foligno are, ahead of guys like Kirill Kaprizov and Kevin Fiala in goals, that's probably not an ideal scenario when your goal is Kevin Fiala. Like I said, this is a guy that's usually paces for around 30 goals a year, and he's not scoring. I mean, that's red flag. And again, I get the frustration there, but to answer your question, I think if Kaprizov was scoring more, it's maybe not talked about quite at the gravity that it is now, but I think it would definitely still be a talking point, mostly because Minnesota sports media always needs to complain about something.
Touche. Also, is this being accelerated a little bit due to the number of players that the Wild have in Iowa that seemingly are knocking on the door, i.e. Matt Boldy, Marco Rossi, Adam Beckman, a couple of other players that could hop up? Is that helping further this along a little bit too?
It's tough to say. I definitely think that situation, I think in my mind, more is, on guys like a Jordan Greenway, who, your spot's not guaranteed here. I mean, he's more, I would look at him as maybe more of like a middle six forward, kind of that third line guy. I don't know that I see Greenway ever being much more than a third line guy. He's a fine one at that. He's not a bad player, but we never really saw him take that next step. But I mean, you do look at, Matt Boldy, 3 goals in 2 games this weekend on his return from, what I'm guessing was probably some sort of ankle sprain, or knee sprain, whatever it was, that he was dealing with. They'll never tell us, of course, but that's, based on watching the injury, that's kind of what I would guess it was, in the timeline as well. But, when a guy like that's coming down, scoring right away, and, this is a guy that could have made the team out of camp had he not gotten hurt. Obviously, we've seen Adam Beckman's got this natural goal scorer's touch too. So yeah, I think there's definitely pressure, and especially when you look at this team going forward, this is a team that's going to be cap strapped. They need to be, make room for these guys to play, because again, there was a lot of outrage when Brandon Duhaime made the team over a guy like Adam Beckman. Well, it's because Duhaime's playing on the 4th line. You're not keeping Adam Beckman to play him on the 4th line. If he's going to play, he's going to play in your top 6, top 9. The Wild, it's the same thing, because the way they roll 3 lines usually pretty relatively equally, at even strength. If he's not playing in one of those spots, I don't think it makes sense to have him up here. And clearly, the management agrees there, which I think is good, because we're seeing Beckman get the reps down there and stuff. But yeah, I mean, I definitely think it makes it easier to maybe put some pressure on Fiala. Like, hey, we could move you. We could call up Boldy tomorrow or Beckman tomorrow, and we could fill your spot with one of those 2 guys if we felt the need to.
Well, that as well. I hate using this. I feel like a broken record, but that's going to be something to monitor too, because if there's one thing in the Minnesota sports landscape, it's that talkers like this usually don't die before they are resolved one way or the other. So
Unless you're Matt Dumba, then they always die, it seems.
oh, I could spend an entire show on Matt Dumba because, as you frequently point out on Twitter, he gets a very bad rap and provides a lot of great stuff on the ice, of course, and off the ice as well to this team. And Team Dumba always
100%.
here. So
Yep.
I did want to finish today by talking about a player that continues to fly a little under the radar, but is a huge part of what is one of the more successful third or fourth lines in the entire NHL. And that is going to require us to go into a weather advisory. So we are going to go into a Sturm warning as we finish our chat with Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn podcast next here on Locked on Wild. It's Thanksgiving week, and we all know what that means. Football. And nothing goes better with football than turkey and betting. BetOnline.ag has you covered all holiday season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline.ag remains your number one spot for all the sports action over the holidays. So head to their new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus with the promo code LOCKEDON. And it's not just football. BetOnline.ag has pro and college hoops, NHL, boxing, UFC, and even your favorite Vegas casino games. So don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline.ag is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all of your favorite sports. BetOnline.ag, we're stuffed with deals this Thanksgiving. Final segment of today's episode of Locked on Wild. Thank you for tuning in and making Locked on Wild your first listen every day. Seth Topol joined by Brett Marshall of the Sound the Foghorn Podcast. Nico Sturm, the Sturm warning in full effect here to finish off the show. Brett, I know he is one of your favorite players on this team. Does just a lot of really good things for this Wild squad. So I want to give you an opportunity just for those that don't pay attention as much as they should. What has led to Nico Sturm becoming such a valuable piece for this team and a huge part of that fourth line success that this team has so often?
Yeah, I think it's just what he brings. I think he's around like 6'3", right around 200, maybe more. So he's a big player, but on top of that, he's really mobile. And a thing I've been preaching kind of since the year we went into the pandemic was the way that hockey is played is changing. I think we used to see, especially in the Western Conference, you get to the playoffs and it was this, which team was bigger and heavier and could throw more hits. And then we saw teams like Tampa Bay and Colorado start to really change that mold when they came with these teams that played quick. They were off the rush. They dominate with speed. And I think that's a lot of what Nico Sturm brings is, yes, he has that size, but he's fast. He plays a north-south game. He's not moving a lot east to west. He's playing heavy. Up the middle and all three zones. I mean, the guy's winning faceoffs too. I don't know what the number is right now, but there was one point this season he was at like 75, something absurd, like 75% of his draws, which we know was a problem for this team last year. And then to have speed, I mean, you can match up against top lines, which a lot of fourth lines can't do when you're playing aging veterans because they can't keep up with the Nathan McKinnon. But I think Nico Sturm can, and we may not have the most elite playmaking ability or a game-breaking shot, but he's a guy that's going to chip in on offense every now and again too. He can kill penalties. I really do think you could put him with skilled players, maybe on the power play, and see some more out of him. Much, and very much in the same ways we always thought would happen with Eriksson Ek, and we've kind of seen that come to fruition the last 2 years. Obviously, he's at the point now, age 26, 27, where players maybe start to hit their peak. But I still think put in the right situation. I mean, this could be a guy that maybe push for 30 to 40 points if he was given the right situation.
I keep campaigning, and I don't know if it would work, but I keep campaigning for him to get even a shift or a game with Kirill, because I think that speed plays well with him. I don't know if it would work. Who knows? Mad scientist here, but do you think, and you kind of alluded to it, but I'll just go ahead and ask the question, do you think he would be able to handle a bigger role on this team if he were elevated depending on what happens next year and beyond?
I think he could. I don't think the coaches do. It seems like for whatever reason they have him pigeonholed in the bottom six. I mean, where he is effective, but I mean, look, for the longest time, that's where Ryan Hartman was too. And all of a sudden, you elevate Ryan Hartman, who's a guy that just kind of plays a similar game. He's kind of a fast north-south guy. He's got an okay shot, not a sniper by any means. The only difference is one is a college free agent, one had a first-round draft pedigree, I think. Otherwise, I think the two are pretty similar players. We've seen Hartman thrive in that role. He might have a little bit more of a passing touch, but I think Sturm's got maybe a little more of a finishing touch. I think he could. A player I've always kind of compared him to is Carter Verhaeghe, who the Wild just saw play for the Florida Panthers. He was same situation in Tampa Bay. He was, kind of this mid-20s kid who was stuck on Tampa Bay's fourth line. They didn't have a spot for moving forward. Florida saw something they liked in him, took him on, stuck him with Alexander Barkov on their first line. And he was, I think, a near point per game player last year. Like, I'm not saying that's what Nico Sturm could be, but I mean, if you look at Evolving Hockey's Rampum for I believe Verhaeghe's season with Florida was like when he was 24, and Sturm's Rampum chart from his first season with the Wild, they're eerily similar at even strength with how they drive play, the things they create. So I've always said, put Nico Sturm with a star and just see what happens. But the Wild have never even seemed to entertain that. I think he'd be a guy, why not try line with him, Hartman, and Fiala? You put Sturm in the middle, you get Fiala on the right, or Fiala on the left and Hartman on the right. You got three guys that can move, that can shoot. All three guys a threat. Sturm's gonna win those faceoffs, give you possession. There's a line I would roll out for offensive zone starts whenever I could too. But it just doesn't seem like there's something they're willing to do for whatever reason. And I think for that reason, it might be. I wouldn't be surprised if he tests free agency to go somewhere. Who, especially being a center, I think the demand's going to be there, and I think there's going to be a team that says, "Hey, we'll pay you $2-3 million to be our third line center," versus the Wild who might say, "We'll give you $2 to be our fourth line center."
That'd be crushing if he were to leave, and so we'll hope that he won't. But yeah, you made a lot of compelling arguments as to why he probably will at least give it a look. But we won't think about that for now. I did want to finish, Brett, by giving you an opportunity to talk a little bit about Sound the Foghorn. Again, you guys do some great work with the podcast and a deeper dive into stats. You guys are up on prospects as well. It's a great listen for Wild fans who are looking for more content throughout the week. So just give us the pitch on the Sound the Foghorn podcast.
Yeah. So our big focus when we started was to find niches and to talk about things that maybe you aren't getting from your Michael Russos and from Joe and Tony over at 10K Rinks, and just try to bring you a different perspective on the Wild. And that's kind of come in the form of three things, and I think it's three different generations of fans. We have Justin, who's kind of been around since the North Stars, me, who started as a day one Wild fan. I was 4 years old when they came to be in the NHL, and then Zeke, who kind of joined. I think he said he kind of became a fan kind of starting in 2014 during that playoff run. So you get three different experiences of fans, and Justin has, keeps tabs on the prospects, running the prospects page. Zeke just has a really fresh take on things and sees things from a different lens than I do. And I like to look at things from a stats perspective and, maybe trying to pull out maybe what, Wild fans always can't see just by watching the games, and maybe explaining why isn't Kevin Fiala scoring? Is he doing the right things? Is he getting to those scoring areas? Things along that nature. And then something we just started up this year too. We brought on Sam Uren, who is the assistant general manager for the Minnesota Whitecaps, that comes on at the beginning of the show each week and gives about a 5-minute update and preview on to what's been going on with the Whitecaps. And that's been something we've had a lot of fun with, and making sure we're giving some love to the girls in town too, not just the boys.
Most definitely. Brett, thank you for the time. A blast. And that's going to wrap it up for today's episode of Locked on Wild. So now that your first listen of the day is done, make sure to head over to the Sound the Foghorn podcast, catch up on last week's episode, and gear up for this week with Brett and the guys over there. Make sure you're following Locked on Wild wherever you listen to podcasts, our social media channels as well. Very active on game day and on off days. So make sure to stick with us, keeping you as up to date on the Minnesota Wild as is possible. You can find new episodes every Monday through Friday as part of the Locked On Podcast Network.